Hey guys, thanks for supporting the generic tech support channel. This is Tech Guy 1. Just wanted to thank you guys all for making this channel great. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. Let's get this video rolling. Hey guys, welcome back to another eXperience feature update, long-term support version 1809 video. Boy, that's a mouthful. I think we're just going to call this thing Windows 10 with the XP wrapper. Or XP wrapper. This thing needs a better name. Poor Travis. He spent all that time on that operating system and left it with a tongue twister. So when we left our last video, we were looking at this particular operating system, and we were left with 38 infos, one medium and one high in the configuration. Now, this is an LTSC 1809 Windows 10 build. And as such, we don't have a baseline for LTSC 1809. And while I could install one to get a baseline so we get a better understanding as to whether or not this operating system is better or worse from a configuration standpoint out of the box, I feel like for a better use of our time, it would make sense for us to just fix the operating system. So one of the first things we're going to do on the operating system is we're going to trim out the high and the medium. And that should be relatively simple. That's going to be our script to fix our SMB issues, and that's going to be a modification of our usernames and passwords. So we're going to have to change our password configuration to not allow the passwords to never expire, and we're going to have to set a password for an administrator account. Now, on this particular system, we have an administrator account, and it's not locked out. So somebody took the time and effort to change the disabled built-in admin account and allow you to log in with the local administrator account. So what we'll do is we'll do the configuration of the administrator account, and then we will run that script, and that should bring us to 39 infos, more than likely. So let's get this started so we could get into the security of this operating system. Okay, so we're back in our OS here. I'm still just mind-boggled at the fact that we're looking at Windows XP on a Windows 10 system, but let's take this time to actually fix this OS as far as our user configuration is concerned. So since we can't right-click on the actual My Computer and go to Manage, because as of right now at least it doesn't work, and we'll see if we could actually resolve this. That may be something that we just leave as is, because it's relatively simple for us to get to the computer manager by just going to CMD and typing comp mgmt and then hitting enter. That brings us into our computer management. What we need to do is we need to go into our users accounts, into administrator, and we're going to have to set the password for the administrator account. Okay, so once we have our password entered in, we'll just hit OK, and then we'll get the prompt that indicates the password has been set, and we'll just click OK. So now that we have a password set, what we need to do now is go to Properties and change the password never expires and get rid of that. We could do the same thing for all the other accounts in here. Now that's a default setting out of the box on all Windows 10 machines, and honestly, it probably exists on all the Windows machines. I just don't know off the top of my head. So with that said, what we have now is we have the accounts actually, we want to leave that disabled. We just don't want to have the password expired. So it's set to change on logon, so that's totally fine. So what we do now is we have the password set, so that way we don't have them set to never expire. Now the never expire triggers something in the Nessus scan, so it will notify that the Nessus scan will create an info based off of the fact that a password is set to never expire. Also, if you don't have passwords set for your logon account, the access controls will throw an error inside of the Nessus scan as well, indicating that you have pass-through or null authentication turned on. Now, we likely will also see notifications for our null authentication pipe, which is a configuration or anonymous pipe access. Those are things that we'll have to modify the actual registry or group policy. If this is, it's LTSC, so it should be pro-based. We should be able to get into a local group policy configuration and modify the local group policy to allow us to disable the anonymous authentication into the system, at which point that should solve a bunch of those other issues. And then we also have to run our script to fix our SMB, which we will also do. Okay, so what I did is I copied over our scripts, and we'll have to execute these scripts in order for us to try to secure this operating system a little better for our scans. Okay, so I want to make sure that there's full disclosure as to what these scripts actually do. So let's actually open them up So we're just going to edit this. And this is going to show us specifically, we're going to add a variety of registry keys here. Now, the LANman workstation and server configuration up here, as we can see, LANman server. And then we have LANman workstation. This is the configuration that's required in order for us to fix the SMB issues with the signature or the signing. Then we have another one down here, which is to disable the remote assistance, because that shouldn't be turned on, but it is turned on by default on our Windows 10 system. Then we have the two things up above here, which is the enable LUA and the content behavior for admin. This is the actual fix that you would put in place in a typical homebrew system to at least semi-enable the UAC controls, so that way you are not locked out of function of the operating system that is required in order to run Windows 10 or Windows 11. Again, there's a bug in those two operating systems that don't allow you to actually turn the UAC off. You can turn it off, but if you turn it off, you remove your functionality of the operating system and the ability to run certain key software applications, which may break the ability for two admins to exist or coexist on a single system. So if it's a single login, then you could turn it off, it works fine. But if you have two administrator accounts on the system and you turn it off, then software may not function on both of the admin accounts, depending on where you installed it from. And then down here is just all the crap that's added into the Windows operating system that does not need to be turned on for the sake or purpose of actually functioning and running it. So this is just all the junk that doesn't need to run on a day-to-day. Now keep in mind that the spooler service is listed here, so if you need to print from the system, you want to remove that stuff from the actual configuration. But the rest of this junk really just does not need to exist if you're going to run the actual operating system as just a desktop operating system. Again, if you have desire to run the Xbox crap through the actual Windows operating system for whatever reason, I understand that it gives you the ability to run it on a laptop, so you could sit and play a game on a laptop while connected remotely to your Xbox. But quite frankly, you'd be better off just getting another monitor and plugging your Xbox into it and running it, just because there's a delay, right? So if you're playing like a first-person shooter, you don't want to delay, because if you delay, you're dead before you actually pull the trigger on the actual game. So, again, I don't see the point in actually using it, but I guess if you're a kid and you have no control over the television, maybe that's the case. But at this point, TVs are so cheap that realistically, I can't imagine that people don't have an additional monitor to plug that system into. Then as we come down here, we have the net.stop commands, which actually stop the actual services. So these disable the services, and this stops the stuff from actually running. Then when we come down here, we have a reset for our firewall. So we turn the firewall profile state to on, which should be on all machines anyway. And then we set the profile to reset the configuration settings in our actual firewall. So if there's anything customized in there, it would have to prompt once again. So it's a good way for us to keep track as to if there's anything addition into the actual firewall configuration. Then if we come down here a little bit, we'll see that we have our NSH firewall rule here to disable the ability for remote assistance through the firewall. And then we come down further and we have the removal of the Internet Explorer from the Windows 10 and Windows 11 systems. Then we have the remote differential compression API support. So that allows API connection from the outside to your machine to control applications. I don't want that turned on, so that's disabled. And then we have the uninstaller for SMB version 1, which kills the SMB version 1 on Windows 10 and Windows 11. Now, obviously, if you're on a legit Windows XP machine, you don't want to run this, because if you do, you're not going to be able to communicate with your Windows XP machine. SMB1 is required for XP to work from a file share perspective. Okay, so let's execute this script and then let's reboot the system. Okay, so our command completed successfully. Let's restart this system now. Okay, so we're going to get prompted now for a password to log into the system, which is good news. I mean, at this point, if you don't know that this is Windows 10 from looking at this, then, you know, I guess this really is the proof, right, that this is XP, or not XP, rather, Windows 10. It's got me saying it. So there we go. Now we're in our Windows 10 environment. Now keep in mind, we have a bunch of stuff running on the system that is not necessary, right? But we just ran a script to clean up a whole bunch of crap that doesn't need to run in the background. So from a performance standpoint, You would think that this would be like every other Windows 10 system, which is usually about 1.8 to 2 gigs of actual utilized memory at idle. But you'd be wrong. So once we stopped all those services, we were actually able to trim the operating system down to 1.1 gigs of required structure to actually run it. So removing the services that aren't necessary for your use case will increase the performance of the system. Now, as from a size perspective, obviously, this is not going to be like our X Lite system, where we're going to have, a tiny operating system. And since this thing's modified, it actually tells us straight out that we're using 13 gigs of storage to run the operating system. And there's really nothing else installed on this thing other than an antivirus. So that's relatively normal, I guess, for Windows 10, but if you compare it to Windows XP as to what XP actually was, it's enormous. Okay, so I think the next part of our configuration here should be our PowerShell script. So let's just go into our C drive, into Tools, grab our PowerShell script, and we're going to edit this. And in here, we're going to have a bunch of different configuration, and I don't know why it lays it out bizarre versus one thing versus the next thing. I'm guessing it's because the host is a Linux box, and that's just basically how that works. So we're not going to run our DISM commands on this particular system because this is not a modified system in the sense of being lightweight in comparison to, say, like an X Lite or a Ghost system. So we don't really have there's really no necessity of running those particular portions of the script. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run this as it sits, and it will do the configuration of our firewall settings, and it will configure them based off of our other script, which we had for all our service structure stopping. And what it'll do is it will disable these ports that allow the communication to the now disabled services, which would have been listening for these communication ports. Okay, so let's just run this. And basically all we got to do is just hit the little play button at the top here, and this will run the script. And we're going to get a bunch of crap down here that's going to fail, and that's because when I created the script for the firewall configuration, I did it for the vanilla, the Ghost, and the X Lite. So only a third of the script will actually work for each one of those operating systems, but it doesn't really do anything other than fail out because the name doesn't exist the same from one operating system to the next. So hopefully our LTSC version doesn't have yet a different naming convention and will actually close out those ports in our firewall configuration. And we should be able to tell here shortly. So while this is actually running, if we go to Control Panel and our Defender Firewall configuration, and we go to, is it the second one up? Oh God, we can't see it, so you're gonna have to bear with me here. Maybe it's the bottom one. There it is. So our inbound configuration connection, we'll see now that our configuration is different. We don't have the same open ports that we had prior. So that tells us right away that that worked. So now during our scan process, when we run our Nessus scan again, we'll see what the results look like. But they should be quite a bit different from a scan perspective. Now keep in mind, what we didn't do with any of these scripts was actually change the name pipe configuration for our anonymous name pipe configuration. It's going to be a registry modification, which we can run to actually fix if it's necessary. But we may not need to run it. It depends on whether or not our configuration, what our configuration looks like once we run through it. If it's still there and still present as an issue, I'll just create the reged to actually fix those particular registry keys. So that way our name pipe communication and configuration requires a signature or authentication. Okay, so our scan is currently running, so we're not completed yet, but we are at 18 vulnerabilities, which is down from the 38 that we had prior. With that said, we do have a high, and the high that exists in here is due to a configuration problem with our name pipe configuration for authentication, so we're going to have to fix that. Once we have that fixed, we should be able to run through this actual configuration, and we should get a much lower number, a much kinder number with the configuration details up here. So let's pause this real quick. I'll write out the script real quick to fix those issues, and then we'll run it again. Okay, so we've modified our script and just added the additional 3 lines to secure our null pipe configuration or anonymous authentication, and set the control configuration the way it's supposed to be, at least based off of our STIGs. So what we'll do now is we'll run these 3 additional configurations on our actual system. And we will take a look to see specifically what our Nessus scan shows after that. Now, we're going to have one high regardless because we're missing a patch, a Windows update that's required in order for us to actually lock down the operating system. So after we run these scripts, maybe before we run our Nessus scan, maybe what we should do is see if we can get Windows updates to function on this particular system. Okay, so what I did is I jumped into the registry real quick to take a look to see specifically what we got configured for our Windows updates. And we have the WU server, the Windows Update server, looking at itself, which obviously will block Windows updates from applying on the system. So the system won't be able to access the Windows Update location because it's pointing to itself. And this is an old school trick to actually stop Windows updates without breaking the Windows Updates function. And it does work, but unfortunately, that's a little too permanent. So I think what I'd like to do here is I'd like to see if we could maybe export our configuration from a working Windows 10 or Windows 11 system and re-import our configuration into the registry set for our Windows 10 system, but set a target version for 1809, which is what this is, so it doesn't attempt to update to a 22H2 or something else. Now, with LTSC, I don't think it will, but still, for the sake of making sure that everything still functions afterwards, or best case scenario, attempting to make sure everything still functions afterwards, I think we should stick with the build number that the system's currently on. So let's see if we could fix the Windows Update stuff in here with a registry modification, and then we will run our Windows Update script to fix the Windows Update configuration services and policies, at which point then we will kick this off and attempt to connect to Windows Updates on this system. Okay, so we have our template configured over here, so we're just going to modify this. And what we're going to do is we need a target or a product version that we want to apply this to. So we want to apply this only to Windows 10, which will stop the system from attempting to update to Windows 11 or upgrade. And we want to choose our target release version, which is 1809. And we're just going to hit save. And that's going to allow us now to run our updates on this system, because what it'll do is it'll replace this crap in here that modifies it to point it to a location that doesn't exist. And again, nothing wrong with that, because again, that's pretty much how that was designed to work. So now if we go in here, we can go to Windows Update. We're going to have to modify this and change this to 0. So we don't want to use the WU server. We don't want to use a Windows Update server. So now we have stuff in here still that isn't going to function. So I think what we're actually going to do is we're just going to straight up delete this folder and do yes. And then go over here and just straight up merge this into the operating system or into the location. And then we could create a new key and call it AU. That's perfect. So now we have our configuration set. So our target release version is 1809. Our target product version is Windows 10. So now the operating system will not attempt to upgrade to Windows 11, and we'll still maintain the 1809 configuration. So that should fix that. But what we need to do now is we need to fix the Windows Update structure with our Windows Update batch file. So let's execute that and fix the update system structure itself. Okay, so we have our files copied over now, so we should be able to execute our Windows Update enabled or our Windows Update disabled. So we can now just run the script to enable the Windows Update function, and then when we don't want to run Windows Updates on the system, we can just simply disable the Windows Update function. So unfortunately, we still have this PE Network Manager installed, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. So we're just going to set our DNS. We're going to obtain our IP address automatically, and then we're going to hit OK so we can connect this system out to the internet. Okay, so now the system's online, so let's run our Windows Update script. Perfect. Now let's attempt to run updates. So it appears that we still have some kind of configuration policy in place. Let's reboot this system. Maybe the reboot will help, because it may be that the registry keys need to be read on system reboot. Okay, so we're reconnected to the net, back online. System just came back up. Let's jump in our configuration again. Let's see if we can get to the Windows Update site. So that fixed it. So registry key change, system reboot to apply the registry key changes, and then basically forcing the system to run the 1809 patches only through our registry configuration allows us now to run the updates on the system. And once these updates are applied on the system, we'll reboot, we'll apply more updates, and we'll continue on and so forth until we have all the updates applied. Now, the reason why this is important is because our highs that are listed in our system, we can't fix those without the updates. So once we get all the updates applied, we'll reboot the system. We'll see if that makes a difference. And again, since this is LTSC, we should be able to run the updates without actually changing the theme pack or the way the operating system appears or functions. So let's continue on through this process and see if we could actually secure the operating system. And at that point, we'll run another scan. So as you guys could see, the updates are still going. I haven't really lost operating system components yet. I mean, for the most part, everything still works the same. I did gain the administrative tools folder back in my start menu, which wasn't there before. Bizarrely, I don't know why, because I don't see what the point is of removing administrative tools that did exist in Windows XP, or at least it was an option in the options menu to add to Windows XP. But at any rate, we're still continuing our update process here, and hopefully after reboot we still contain, or the operating system still remains intact, where we still have functionality in our XP look, because it is something that, like I said, I really am enjoying. Well, we just got a failed update, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a full fail. It could be because there's prereqs that installed but require a reboot before we install that. So let's reboot the system, and when it comes back up, we'll continue on our update process. Okay, so our system just rebooted, and yeah, I don't really care. So T-Clock, which is just the time clock application that's inside of this thing that's based off of XP, that didn't start correctly. I'm not overly concerned with that. Let's get the system back on the internet. Let's check for more updates to see if there's anything left. Okay, so we're back online. Let's go to the settings panel here, and let's check for updates and see if there's anything left as far as updates. Now, I suspect we'll probably always see these errors in here just because the system does not have Defender on it any longer. So there's no antivirus built into it anymore. And as a result, when it goes to run its updates, the service structure that used to exist for Defender is gone. And I'm guessing that even with our updates, we probably still don't have Defender. And it's kind of there. Although we learned from previous videos with Windows 10 that if we wanted to, we could fix Defender and just put it back into place. Now we'll check to see if this update still attempts to install, or if it fails again. And if it fails again, then I'll just give up at that point, and I'll stop the services for our Windows Update structure by running our other script, and then we'll jump into the Nessus configuration and run the scan to see if this resolves any of those issues. Okay, so our update's finished, and again, we ended up with an error in the April 2024 update for our Windows 10. So we're just going to skip this one. So once the system comes back up, we'll run the script to disable the Windows updates again, and we will run our Nessus scan against this system. Okay, so Windows is coming back up. We'll probably get the pop-up about our T-Clock failure, and we will also probably get a failure or the notification about our super anti-spyware. So it appears that the T-Clock failure didn't appear this time. So let's disable our Windows updates. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're just going to go into our tools directory. And we have our Windows Update enable script, just like we have our Windows Update disable script. So if you run this as admin. Okay, so now at this point, if I was to go in here and just hit the S key on the keyboard for the settings console, we should be able to go to updates and security. And yeah, we have check for updates, but we don't have anything actually looking for updates. So we're reverted back to disabled. So what we need to do now is we need to static IP address back on the system. We'll re-enable the network adapter, and then we will scan the system with the Nessus scanner. So the scanner is now scanning the system, but I figured I'd take this time just to ask you guys to leave a comment down below and let me know if you guys are interested in these Windows Update registry modifications. And if you are, what I'll do is I'll put them in the Git repository so you can grab them out of there. So you can customize your Windows 10 or Windows 11 system based off of whatever preference you want to set inside of the configuration for your registry settings for your Windows updates. And we could create a video on how to do that. If you guys are interested in that, just throw something down in the comments and let me know, and I will create a video on how to take the information that I'll put in the Git repository for you to modify. So if you want to set your updates to only run at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday and not bother you during the day, we could go over how to do that. If you want to make it so that way the system doesn't go past a certain target version, we can make it do that. Or we could flip the other way and say, all right, well, what if we want to upgrade to Windows 11, but we don't want to do it during the day? I could show you how to do the scripting for upgrading to Windows 11, or I could show you how to do the modification in our registry key here to force the system to upgrade to Windows 11 from Windows 10. Now, keep in mind that these modifications in here will work for the online version, but if you have a WSUS server, we can modify the configurations in here too to point to the WSUS server in a workgroup mode machine and allow your Windows 7 machine to upgrade to Windows 10. Again, these are all stuff that still work based off of our configuration standards, based off of things that you can modify on the local system. They don't require the additional purchase of the Windows 10 license. It'll still allow you to do the upgrade from 7 to 10 as long as your hardware supports it. All right, guys, so let's jump over now and take a look at that Nessus scan. Okay, so before we jump into our actual scan for our results for the changes that we've made on our operating system, our original configuration had 38 infos, 1 medium, and 1 high. And that's unknown as to whether or not that's good in comparison to the LTSC for 1809. Quite frankly, we just don't have an LTSC system that we've done the vanilla test on to do the vanilla results back from an OEM out-of-the-box configuration versus this now Windows XP clone version of Windows 10. So right now we're sitting at 38 info, 1 medium, and 1 high. And the 1 high is from the name pipe configuration for anonymous or null authentication, which we have now fixed through our registry modification. Our medium is from our SMB version 3, allowing the communication on SMB version 3 without any signature or signing. So those two things are fixed with our registry modification. And then we have a variety of configuration problems inside for our infos. But the info configuration problems are generally resolved by Windows updates or other minor or minimal security configuration changes and aren't considered a threat because they're not something that like necessarily like a remote code execution or something to that effect, but more along the lines of, you know, turning off, I don't know, one setting versus leaving the setting on is the best practices is to leave that one setting on versus turning it off. And that would, you know, throw in info, or having your firewall configuration set to allow ports through the firewall, but then on the back end not have anything listening for those ports. That's a configuration issue as well. But we should have most of that stuff buttoned up now with the scripting that we've run on this actual system. So we'll take a look here in just a second once this thing finishes scanning and be able to provide details on that. Okay guys, so our scan finished finally for our script configuration. So this is after our scripts and after our Windows updates on that system. Now that system still has the Windows updates. Well, now the Windows updates are disabled on the system, so we're going to generate at least one security concern there. And we also have our Windows Firewall disabled for the scan, so we're also going to see a security concern there. But otherwise, we are, at this point, the number to beat is 38. Let's see what we got. We got 16 infos. So at this point, the system's actually more secure than our Windows 10 out-of-the-box configuration would be on an OEM vanilla system after running our security configuration changes. Now, keep in mind that even though our security configuration changes were run, and we do have 16 infos, the vast majority of these things can actually be fixed by turning the Windows updates back on. The test credential test failed. These are probably just false positives. I wouldn't worry too much about that stuff. The ICMP disclosure, which is because our firewall is turned off again. I don't really see too much in here. So the SMB obtains the password policy. That's a concern, but it's only a high concern in certain situations. In this situation, it's not because we have encryption turned on for our password. If we didn't have encryption enabled, then that would be a high alert versus an info alert in our Nessus scan. So in previous scans, we've seen that high alert before, and that's because somebody had disabled the encryption policy in the actual operating system versus this operating system, which does not have that disabled. Let's see what else we got in here. Okay, so we have the group user list available, which is based off of the set information. We have local users that are disabled, which is, again, we know that already. They're built-in accounts. Again, disabled built-in accounts that have never been logged into are going to show in here as well as info. So if we just deleted those things, we would clear up the amount. And we turn the firewall back on, we'd be back down to probably about 11 to 10 on the info configuration, which means that this operating system, after running the security configurations, all the updates, and scripting it for the services that we only are going to use, is pretty well secure. And basically that means that we have a secure, up-to-date version of Microsoft Windows XP, all things considered, which is kind of cool. Let me know if you guys are interested in more information on this operating system, or if you guys know where to get in touch with a dev and find the later build version, because that would be cool. But all things considered, we could still run the updates on the LTSC version without changing the actual operating system. So that's pretty sweet. And at least from a functional standpoint, all of it appears to still work, still look the same, and still exist from a configuration standpoint, which is pretty sweet. So that means you can still run updates on this, still can keep it secure, and still use it as a daily driver as far as the functionality and security is concerned. Let's end this video here, and the next thing we will do is the test drive, where we will install a bunch of software on this thing and see if it functions as a day-to-day driver, as a daily usable operating system. Thanks for sticking around, guys. Take it easy.